Hello everybody and welcome to this webinar on statistics and mixed methods analysis with MAXQDA Stats. My name is Stefan and I'm a professional MAXQDA trainer giving lots of workshops on MAXQDA, giving lots of trainings and consultings on MAXQDA and research methods, and I'm also involved in the development of MAXQDA. So today I will talk about 40 minutes on the MAXQDA Stats, including the newest features included in MAXQDA Stats in 22.2, which was released 4 weeks ago. So I'm happy to explain the whole package MAXQDA Stats to you. And if you have a question, you can write it in the chat and I will try to include it in my presentation. But I will not be able to catch up all of the questions. So afterwards, we will have the time that you can post also questions in the chat and we can work on that. So please note that the webinar will be recorded and it will be made available on YouTube. So the option is that you can view everything that we are going through today later on, and you can concentrate on MAXQDA and the features and don't need to know every click sequence or feature name. So what is MAXQDA Stats? MAXQDA Stats is a standalone statistics module that is fully integrated into MAXQDA. So you will find one menu entry here, which is called Stats, and we will shortly go into MAXQDA and explore all the features there. So the features that are available are listed here. So we have the option to create frequency tables and crosstabs. We can create correlation and we can perform an analysis of variance. We can perform scaling, so we can create scales. And we have also options for creating bar charts, box plots, etc. So we have the option to visualize our results. So if we put it together, we can say that we have standard procedures which cover the descriptive and inferential statistics in MAXQDA Stats. So what can you analyze with MAXQDA Stats? It's the data of your MAXQDA project. That means the document variables and the code frequencies. Or you can work with external data files, which come in the format SPSS or Excel. So you are able to analyze survey data, interview studies, document analysis, or if you're doing a document analysis, you can use MAXQDA Stats for literature reviews, or also for a mixed method study, and there are many more options there. So you can also work with a focus group data there, but and you can include it in MAXQDA Stats, but usually on the focus group level, not on the speakers level. I'm saying this because there was some kind of a question there, and I will go back to that question later on. For now, let's go and have a look at the MAXQDA interface, which I assume you are familiar with. So here we have the document system, which contains 156 documents, because these are the results of a survey on a crisis. So we have answers to open-ended and answers to closed-ended questions from 156 persons, which you can see when I go here down to the status bar and I activated all the documents, because each case is represented here in one document. Here the document 2, or the document with the name R002, is opened, and here we have the qualitative data the answers to the open-ended questions. For example, here on the question, how are you affected by a crisis? And they have already been coded here. The person with the ID 2 says, not really much. Well, our cheaper car parking tickets have gone now. They withdrew concessionary tickets, so now it's more difficult to get into town for the things I need. And there have been 2 codes applied to this. So the travel code and the income down code have been applied to these piece of data here. And you see there are several more subcodes which might have been applied to the answers of question 2. For example, we have jobs lost here, we have family, we have pensions. And please note that each code has been only coded at a maximum of 1. Yeah, so a maximum one time to each document. So the numbers here are also indicating the number of cases who are dealing with this issue. So we have 28 persons where family has been coded and 26 where pensions have been coded. So I have taken this example because I can show many of the stats features with it. You can also use MAXQDA Stats for smaller samples, of course. You can use it, I think, at least 20 cases should be available to really perform analysis on a statistical level there. Usually you might have 30 maybe or so. So the question is on how many documents do you have in your document system here. So the open-ended questions are not the only data available in this MAXQDA project, but there are also some answers to the closed questions, and these have been recorded here in the data editor. So for example, here we have the documents, and here we have the information that person number with the ID number 2 is retired, is widowed, belongs to the age group of the 70 to 79-year-olds, lives in a rural region, and in a job security scale from 0 to 4. The person says 4, the idea of feeling safe, yeah, or feeling secure. So by using this document name, MAXQDA combines and matches these quantitative data stored in this rectangle matrix with the qualitative data here in this document browser. So via these document names here, MAXQDA knows and can combine the qualitative and the quantitative data. Before we now start stats, I will show you what happens when we transform a code into a document variable. And I'm doing this because in the background, when starting stats, this will take place for every code in the code system. So I will create an example to show you what is going on in the background when we will start stats soon. So I right-click on the jobs lost code and select the feature transform into document variable. Transform does not mean that the code is removed from the code system, but that the information, how often a code has been applied within each document, is added as a new variable here in the data editor. So you see that we have here a new variable, jobs lost, gets the same name as the code, and it is a black variable. It is black headed because here this black color indicates that it is managed by MAXQDA. I cannot change it here, but MAXQDA dynamically updates this column for me. For example, here we know that for respondent 2, the code jobs lost has not been applied, which is absolutely true because here we have the travel and the income down code applied, not the jobs lost code. Then we see, for example, that for respondent with the ID number 4, we have once jobs lost coded one time, and here jobs lost has been coded as in this inspection of the open-ended answer here reveals. So please keep in mind this data matrix because I will start stats now by navigating to the Stats toolbar ribbon here in the menu entry. And here we have different options. I can start with all documents, and this is what I do for now. I will start Stats and we get this view. MAXQDA Stats is in the foreground, so all the data that is in this project, in this MAXQDA project, the data from the codes and the data from the document variables has been transferred here to Stats. And if I look in the background, you see that MAXQDA is currently not visible because MAXQDA Stats is blocking MAXQDA. So we are now in the statistical environment and can work here. What happens here is that here in the data editor, which I can switch here between different views, we see again respondent number with the ID 2. And we see some additional variables. And here are the variables that you already know, because here we have the employment status. We know the person is retired. The marital status. We know the person is widowed. And we have the age group, etc. all listed here. And we have also the manually by me converted, transformed code into a document variable here in this column. So what happens now is that I have the option here to switch between different views. For example, here to the variable list, where I can manipulate the names, where I can add a variable label, where I can add value labels and missing values, which you might be familiar with these logic from statistical programs, statistical software. Usually when working with MAXQDA data, we don't need to open the variable list and work here, except we want to create new variables by hand, or we want to transform any variables type into another or so. So I switch back to the data editor, which is much more informative here for our purposes. And I ask you to have a look at this menu bar. Here you will see that we have different options for creating and performing different statistical analyses. So for example, here we have the transform option where we can compute a new variable. Computing a new variable means that I take some of the columns that I see here, the visible and the non-visible code columns, and mix them up, let's say, or in fact, we are doing some calculations there. For example, we can use the plus, minus, multiply, divide, the average, the square root, rounding, to create a new variable. For example, you see here that we have the variables from our project for which we can perform calculations, so not text variables, but the ones with the numbers. And we also have all the codes from our code system here, because the code frequencies are also available here. So what I will do is I will create a new variable, which I will call affected. And this covers the degree, the number of subcodes, in fact, that have been applied to a person, to a case. So I take these jobs lost code, how affected by crisis, this subcode, which has the number C2. You see they are all numbered to be able to access them. And I double click on them to populate them here in the numerical expression, and I press the plus sign, or I can click on this plus, and then I select the C3, and the C4, and 5, 6, C7, code 8, code 9, code 10, 11, the Moray code, and the other code. And you see that I'm creating now here, and I'm summing up all the frequencies of subcodes. And as they all are 0 or 1s, we now get the information in a new variable, which is added here at the top right, how often or how many subcodes from how affected have been applied to each case. So this is some kind of degree of affectedness here from this crisis. And we see that for person 1, which has in fact the ID 2, 2 codes have been applied. And if you scroll down a little bit, you will see that here is a person which is much more affected, or where at least 4 codes, subcodes have been applied. And now we can use this newly created variable, which uses our code, our qualitative analysis information, to perform statistics. So we can start with simple statistics. We can create a frequency table. So here I start this function, and in MAXQDA stats we usually have these options dialogues. On the left I can select variables and codes, which we will do later. So we start with the variables, and I can select them to the right and for our calculations. For example, I can start with the marital status, the age group, the region, and the newly created variable affected. And for these 4 variables, after clicking OK, MAXQDA will perform a frequency analysis and presents these results tables. These are typical frequency tables. So here we can see 91 persons, 91 of our 156 overall cases are married, 14 are widowed, and there are 18 persons for whom we don't have the information about the marital status. So we can calculate percentages and the valid percentages and the cumulated percentages here. We can switch to the next variable by clicking on these blue arrows, or to the previous one again there, or we can select a variable here. And you can see that I can switch to the next variable or the third variable here. And I go to the affected variable, and here we see that 22 persons have no subcode from the code how affected by the crisis applied to. And there is only 1 person that we could identify already here in this line, in this row, with 4 subcodes. So this seems to look fine here, or interesting. So we have 92 persons which have 1 code, and here we have all the information on how often the code has been applied. So there is a question, what is the difference between the valid percentage and the percentage? So this is easily to explain here on the first marital status table. Here you will see that we have 18 missing values, and while the percentage column explains or takes into account all cases here, so including the missing cases, so we know there are 11.5% missing cases, the valid cases only takes into account here the valid cases for which we have data. So the last 2 columns are not included here in these valid percentages. This is the difference between both columns. And I go back to our variable here affected, to the results table here. So here we see that we have different options in this table. For example, we can right click on the first row and click on or select delete. And MAXQDA will instantly delete the row from the table and will present this table here and updates all the frequencies in the table. So now the total is not 156 anymore, but it is 134. In fact, this deletion makes not really sense, so I undo this action. What makes more sense is that I also have this interactive table here with the option to merge different values. So here, if I click on merge values after selecting and highlighting several rows, 2, 3, and 4 are now aggregated and merged into one value. Now we have 22 for the ones that have no codes, 92 with 1 code, and 42 with 2, 3, or 4 codes. So we have aggregated these persons into one larger group to be able to continue working with them. Please note that we can also calculate descriptive statistics here. We can access the mean value, the standard deviation, the minimum and the maximum, and these descriptive statistics take into account the data before we have merged them, or ignores the merging, but takes into account the deletion of rows. I can also export this table. For example, I can copy it to the clipboard. I can open my research or my report in a Word document, and I can paste the table into it. You see that the MAXQDA team did all the best to create a table which is already some kind of layouted and has a nice design. So for a basic statistics, we can start with these tables and investigate our data there. We have also the option to send and to insert our result table here into the so-called output viewer, or all the data that we have created, including the descriptive statistics for the variables where this can be calculated. And you see MAXQDA switches here to the output viewer and includes or transfers all the created tables into our output viewer here. So after closing MAXQDA Stats and reopening MAXQDA Stats, these data will still be here. These results table are some kind of conserved here in this output viewer. There's also the option, since MAXQDA 22, to send our result table, which is presented here, to a QTT worksheet. QTT stands for Question, Themes and Theories. And in these QTT worksheets, we have the option to create in these worksheets, we have the option to include all the results that we have found in our study and comment on them and continue working with them, interpreting, analyzing them. So for example, here we could include a worksheet which is called Statistics. The subject would be here crisis. The research question is how much affected, for example, and who is affected, etc. Affected here. And if I create this sheet, MAXQDA will insert the frequency table there, and I can write my insights on these frequencies here and continue my analysis later on. So I have also the option here in MAXQDA Stats to switch to a diagram view, which is often the more comprehensive and understandable idea of accessing the data. For example, here we can see by using these bar charts the differences between the groups or between the regions. For example, we have nearly equal groups who live in rural and who live in urban areas. And also these can be transferred to the QTT. They can be transferred to the output viewer here, or they can be copied to the clipboard and can be included directly in our research report as a high quality graphic. So we can include them in reports, in posters, etc. So if we continue our tour here to MAXQDA Stats on the descriptive statistics menu, you will see that we have also the option here to calculate descriptive statistics. And I will take the affected code, which we have created beforehand, and will include it here as affected. And now I can select another variable or a code, and I can split up my results, which is a new feature here in 22.2. And the result looks like this. Here I have the table affected rural area, affected in urban area. We have a little difference here in the mean value. So we have 1.25 in the rural area and 1.11 in the urban area. So we can also show the results here in form of box plot, which makes not so much sense here because we have only the values 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is a discrete variable, but it gives an idea of the distribution of this variable. And it is also automatically here split up in our regions, which is nice to compare different groups in MAXQDA Stats. So please note that in the background, as I've already explained, not only the variables are here, but also the codes. So we took these affected code here, but we could also, the variable here, which we have created manually, computed manually, but we could include the parent code here and use the new option sum up frequencies of subcodes and click on OK, and we will get the same results here because MAXQDA will do all the calculations in the background for us, and this is very helpful. So I will maybe go back to the descriptive statistics frequencies and show it again with here, because it's here some kind of easier to understand. So here you see that we have not only the variables, but also the codes tab, which is the unique idea of MAXQDA Stats environment. And for example, we can take the code jobs lost here. For the code jobs lost, we have the option to binarize it, which some kind means that no matter how often a code has been applied to a document, it will be only coded as 1 if it has been applied, and it will be counted as 0 if it has not been coded. We don't need this option here because clicking it or deselecting it makes no difference in our analysis here. We get the same result. So here we know that for 116 persons, we have the code not been coded, no documents, but for 40 persons here, we have the information, which is 26% about where the jobs lost code had here in MAXQDA. Oh, I need to rename it. Jobs lost, of course. Yeah. So by selecting these jobs lost code here, I have the option to binarize it, but I can also include the how affected by crisis, the parent code here. And here also I have the option to sum up the frequencies of subcodes. So here MAXQDA does now all the stuff, all the calculations, all the transforming that I used beforehand by computing new variable. And you see we get the same results here, 22 persons for 22 cases. The code how affected, none of the subcodes by how affected has been applied. For 92 persons, there's 1 subcode, and there's only 1 person with 4 subcodes. So these new options offer me, some kind of a fast track here for analysis. Let's continue with the Compare Groups menu. There we have the cross tabs. And in the cross tabs, we have the option to create a frequency table, which is divided into columns. So for example, we can have a deeper look onto the jobs lost code, and we can investigate if the region has any effect on the application of the jobs lost code. Please note that here we also have the option to binarize the row codes, but we don't need this here again because it's already binarized. And how does the result look? Here we have again the 160 persons where the code jobs lost has not been applied. Here we have the 40 people where the code jobs lost has been applied. And here we have the 80 persons from rural area, and here from the urban area where we have 76 persons. And now the question is, is there any difference in these columns? And this is hard to say if we are dealing with these absolute frequencies. So we have several options to include in this table. For example, the column percentages, which is usually the best idea if we have the grouping variable here in the columns. So now we can see that there are much more in percentages in the rural area where the code jobs lost has been coded. In fact, 33% versus only 18% in the urban area. And to make it more easy for display, it might be a good idea to change here to diagram view, where we see that here we have the one where jobs lost has been coded, and here we have 33% against 80.4%. The interesting thing now of MAXQDA Stats is that it is always connected with the original data. So MAXQDA knows exactly which 26 documents are in this cell. So this is not a one-way road here, but we can go back to our qualitative analysis. So for example, we can right-click here and say use as filter in data editor for further statistical investigation, because now the 26 cases here, the 26 cases are filtered here by adding a new stats filter variable and setting it to 1 for every person which lives in a rural area and the jobs lost code has been applied. Or we can say save as document set, which means that we can use this data in our qualitative analysis. So what happened is that one document set has been created, and when I close MAXQDA Stats and I click OK, the data is transferred to my MAXQDA project, and you see here that now we have a new document set in the document system, and it contains only the 26 persons. You see that it is a sample of the whole 156 persons where the jobs lost code has been applied and who lives in a rural area. We can shortly double check this. We open this document. It's already opened here for number 4. The code jobs lost has been applied. And if we check the data editor for the variables, we will see that here the region for person 4 is rural. So in this document set, only those persons where both conditions apply are selected and are compiled. So we can use our quantitative analysis in stats for grouping our data and using it for group comparison, using it for later statistical analysis, for later on qualitative analysis here in MAXQDA or in MAXQDA Stats. Then. Okay, I start again MAXQDA Stats with all the data, with all the documents, and go back to the compare groups data, the compare groups menu here. And you will see that we have also the t-test and the Mann-Whitney U-test, which have been included as new features into MAXQDA 22.2 4 weeks ago. So these are new options here. And let's say we can try a t-test, for example, to show it to you. So here we take our created variable affected. Alternatively, we could use the codes here, but we take our variable and we might check again for the region and perform more inferential statistics here. For example, here we see the results of a t-test here, including Cohen's D and Hedges G as coefficients for effect size. In fact, these are very low here because the mean difference is not so high. It's 0.145. And we can switch also here again to the diagram, to the chart view, and we see here again the 1.25 and the 1.11, which we have calculated before and which are displayed here. But our results tell us that this is not statistically significant. The p-value is 11%, so it's much higher than the usually considered 5%. And we have here some information on if it is okay to use the t-test, if it is a good idea. And we have here also newly included in MAXQDA 22.2 the Shapiro-Wilk test and some descriptive statistics here to check if we can assume a normal distribution for the variables. So we can not only compare two means with the t-test, but we can also perform an analysis of variance. And in the analysis of variance, we can again choose the affected code or the variable we have created there. And now we don't take the region, but we could use the age group, or here let's take the employment status, which has much more subgroups. I already switch here to the diagram view, which makes it more visible what is going on here. We have the lowest value for the part-time persons with 1.05 and 1.4 for the unemployed. So the unemployed here are the most affected persons. But if we perform an analysis of variance, this will not be a statistical significant result. And newly added to MAXQDA 22 are the post-hoc tests here and the Cohen's d and Hedges g information on the differences between each group. For example, employed and part-time, the difference is 0.116, and here the Cohen's d is 0.16, and here Hedges g also 0.16 about. So, but you always need to think of, is it a good idea to apply inferential statistics to your data? It makes sense for a document analysis, I think, where you have a random sample, but it wouldn't make so much sense for other data. Okay, so there is also some new features here in the correlations menu. So let's calculate the Spearman's correlation, for example, for job security scale and our newly created affected variable. And here we get the information on how high the correlation is. The correlation is minus 0.064, which is nearly nothing. Yeah, it is nearly zero. There is no correlation. There's no mathematical correlation between job security scale and affected. But now we have here also some new options in this dialog result window. We can display and switch on and off the p-values and the number of cases. We can highlight by p-values, which was available beforehand. But now we can also highlight by correlation, which will not result here in any highlight because there are now correlations which could be highlighted. But the most interesting thing is that we now have an interactive chart view here. So here we see affected by job security scale. Each dot tells us if there are persons, if there are cases for this combination of the values. And the bigger the circle here is displayed, the more cases there are. And now we can have a look on some special persons, because this is now interactive. If I hover over any of these dots, you will see that I can select them, or I can even delete them, or I can, for example, take this one who's very low in job security scale and very highly affected. This looks like two people, two persons. I can right click on it. I can save them as a document set, or I can use them as a filter in the data editor. And you see here, now we have the filter applied again. And these are the two persons which are very low on the job security scale, but highly affected. Okay, so these interactive new options allow us to select one or several points here and interact with the data in a quantitative but also in a qualitative way. We can continue our analysis in a qualitative way after we have identified the extreme cases here in MAXQDA Stats. So the last option, or this last feature I want to show you for now, is the scaling, but therefore I will import an SPSS file. So I simply click on File, open an external file, and here MaxQDA read 2000 cases from a large SPSS file with 12 variables. They are all on the different attitudes towards the environment, like preservation and protection of our native country, justice between generations, do not use more resources than grow back, fair trade between rich and developing countries. And now MaxQDA offers the reliability analysis and the calculation of Cronbach's alpha. We can select all these items here where persons could apply from I highly agree to I don't agree with these statements. And MaxQDA calculates here these results. And of course, we could do this with codes too, not only with these variables. But I don't have we couldn't do it with the project we used before. This is a better example here. So here we see that Cronbach's alpha is above 0.7, it is 0.773, which is a quite good value for a start. And we can highlight here interactively which is the lowest item. This is citizens can contribute only a little to the energy conservation. And this has a very low correlation with this scale. And it is, if we delete it, the Cronbach's alpha, which is a coefficient for the unidimensionality of this, and consistency, let's say, the consistency of this scale. And I can delete this item with a click. Here, I just select it, I delete it. And now the next lowest correlation item is selected here. But Cronbach's alpha already increased to 0.782. So everybody who has worked with scaling and other statistics software sees that it is very helpful to have this interactive environment, and we can also build a scale and save it as a new variable. For example, we can create a new scale which we call attitude towards environment and calculate the mean, and it is immediately included here as a new variable. Yeah, this was my explanation of the stats features and including the new ones from the latest release of MaxQDA 22. And please let me finish my presentation with a review of the benefits that you have when using MaxQDA Stats. So here I see that I think that you have many enhanced mixed methods analysis. So you can use the interactivity to change and to have a smooth transition between the qualitative and the quantitative data analysis. There is no need to change between software packages, and there are many, many more benefits. And now it's time that you send your questions to the chat, and I've already seen some, and I will prepare something for it to answer them, while you might want to write some more questions in the chat. Okay. Give me a second, I'm preparing a file because someone asked how to upload the data that you have into MaxQDA Stats and into MaxQDA, and I'm searching for a good file to include in my presentation. Okay, and there are other ones coming in. Oh, I'm still looking for this file. I'm sorry, it takes some time, but I will take the questions shortly. I'm making a quick search here. Ah, yes, here we have it. Let's start with this one. Okay, so there was one question, and the question is, how do I import my data into MAXQDA to perform statistical analysis, to perform other analysis? And here we have an Excel sheet which contains the results from an online survey. In fact, it is nearly the same data, or part of it, that we were dealing with before. So every respondent has a single row here, and I highlighted all the standardized information with the blue background color, and I used the orange color to mark the columns with qualitative information with the answers to open-ended questions. And what we can do now is that we can take this file and we can import it into MAXQDA via the following function. So here's an import tab. Oh no, I will create a new project first. Open, a new project. I call it survey. Save it here on my desktop. And now I can import these survey data from an Excel spreadsheet. I can import it directly from SurveyMonkey, or I can import the data from an SPSS file, which is sometimes helpful for keeping the values and not makes it sometimes easier. So I take this Excel file that I showed you beforehand, and MAXQDA immediately analyzes this Excel file and tries to identify which are the standardized columns, which columns contain the answers to open-ended questions. For example, here, how affected by crisis, fault comment and purchases comment. And I can import it. New variables are there. As I said, it's a shorter sample. Then we have them here. And what you see is, I need to remove the idea. Here we have the information. So here is all the data imported into this MAXQDA project. The variables are available here as in the data editor for document variables. And this is the idea of importing MAXQDA or a survey into MAXQDA, and then we can work with stats there after, for example, we have used the categorized survey data. Okay, let me scroll up. There was another question. Here we have the question, and I will copy it to this Word file, and you can all read the question. This should make it easier. So in the focus group, or if the focus group comprises 8 groups, so there is an analysis with 8 focus groups, will the analysis with MAXQDA be meaningful to interpret? I think not really for statistical purposes or with statistical would be meaningful to interpret, but you can use it to identify special focus groups on a group level here, which deviate from the others, for example, regarding some code frequencies, but I think you wouldn't need stats for this. So if you're dealing with these focus groups, I think it would be a good idea to have a look at the MAXQDA manual, because there is a very large section on how to analyze focus groups, and there are many ideas included. And if you go to MAXQDA Press, I will have a short screenshot of that later on too, you will find a guide which helps you for focus group analysis there. Okay, then we have the question here. Is Spearman the best way to create a plot with 2 variables, one value on X and another on Y? On the y-axis, yeah, that's no, it's not the best way. It's one way. You can either use Pearson or you can either use Spearman. The diagram view is the same. What is different is the statistic that is calculating the correlation coefficient. So Spearman is used for ordinal variables, and Pearson can be used for interval variables. You can distinguish between both of them. You can use the Pearson if you can calculate the mean, let's say, and you can use the Spearman if you cannot calculate a mean for the variables analyzed, but you can order each variable value. This is the idea of Spearman and Pearson. Okay, then we have here another question. It is, for the purposes of statistical analysis, is it best to code by using the subcodes only rather than both the subcodes and main code? Would it make a difference in terms of combining subcodes to create a new variable? Yeah, this is a really good question, and I will switch back to our MAXQDA project that we have created before. And yes, of course, this is a big difference. Here, for example, I worked with codes which are the parent codes, the main categories here, and they are not coded, because when I want to use the sum up frequencies of subcodes option in MAXQDA Stats, it makes no sense if they are also coded here. Then I can use the sum of them, the subcodes. Of course, there is often the case that also the main code has been coded. So if you don't want to use the option, you don't need to split it up. But if you want to use the option in MAXQDA Stats, you would need to copy all the information from the main code to a temporary or to another code. This is something I've done here. So, for example, you can see it here. I've included survey question codes. Here we have the 147 persons who have answered these questions there on how affected by crisis. And these are all the answers there. These are some kind of the codings of the main code, but I've created a new code here for all the subcodes to have a code which has only 0 segments in it. I hope this explanation was not too circling and it helps a little bit. Yeah. Are there any other questions from your side? Then I'm happy to answer them, and I'm happy if you include them in the chat. Okay, it looks like there are no more questions coming up in the chat. I will have an eye on that if there might be some more. Please note that if you need some more resources, you can go to YouTube, you can check the videos on mixed methods with MAXQDA. There is many literature on mixed methods with MAXQDA. Some of it you will find on MAXQDA Press. There is also a guide that we've written on how to analyze open-ended questions with MAXQDA and to combine it with the quantitative data. I think there are lots of resources there, and if you search mixed methods for MAXQDA, this would be very helpful. And there are 2 notes I want to pay your attention to. So there is a new MAXQDA research network in the LinkedIn. So there is a new group which offers you to build valuable relationships. You can share best practices there. You can discuss trends and challenges in analyzing qualitative and mixed methods data. You can ask questions there, I think, and in the group. And there are regular research sessions where persons present their work with MAXQDA, which might be helpful for you. And if you're interested in the MAXQDA grants, please note that currently there are 3 grants for early career scientists. The theme for 22 is women empowerment. So have a look at the MAXQDA website to if you're interested in the MAXQDA grants. So this was it from my side. Thank you very much for your attention and have a nice evening. Goodbye.